You know, sometimes life has a way of teaching you lessons you never asked for but desperately need. I was living my dream, or at least, I thought I was. I had a husband I loved, a home we built together, and a life I thought was perfect. But one thing, just one thing, he couldn't accept, changed everything. He left me, and he left me for a reason that cut deeper than words. I was childless. And if you think that's where my story ends, you are very, very wrong. Because sometimes, life doesn't just give you what you prayed for, it gives you what they never saw coming. I remember the moment like it was etched in my bones. I remember the sound of the door slamming behind him, the hollow echo bouncing off the walls of our home and settling deep inside my chest. I remember standing there frozen, my hands trembling, my heart pounding as if it were trying to escape my body. I remember the disbelief, the crushing weight of what had just happened, and the sharp sting of betrayal piercing every part of me. I had loved him with everything. I had given him my trust, my time, my heart, my soul, and yet it was never enough. He left me for something I could not control, something I had no power over, something that was not a flaw in me but a circumstance of life. He left me because I was childless, and the reason burned like fire in my chest. It was a humiliation, a rejection, a verdict passed on me as if my worth could be measured by the presence or absence of a child. I could feel my knees go weak, my vision blur, and my chest tighten as the words that he had said and the actions he had taken replayed in my mind over and over, and I could not breathe for a moment. I thought I might collapse into the floor and never get up again. The house that had once been a sanctuary became a prison filled with echoes of his laughter and the ghost of what we had shared, every corner reminding me of him, every room a testament to my failure. In his eyes I wandered from room to room, touching the things we had bought together, staring at the pictures on the walls, trying to make sense of how someone I had loved so deeply could turn on me so completely. I kept asking myself what I had done wrong, what I had missed, what I had failed to give him, that he would abandon me so easily. I questioned my body, my soul, my very being, wondering why life had dealt me this hand and why someone I had trusted with everything could betray me in such a way. I felt naked, exposed, as if everyone could see my pain and my shame, and there was no place to hide. The nights were the hardest when the silence of the house pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about what had been and what could have been, thinking about the promises that were broken, the dreams that were shattered, the life I had imagined that was no longer mine. I cried rivers of tears until I thought my eyes would run dry, and I screamed into pillows that would never answer my cries. I cursed the unfairness of it all, and yet I could not stop loving him. I could not stop wondering if somehow I could have done something differently, if somehow I could have been enough. I felt a rage simmering under the surface, a mixture of hurt and anger that burned through me. I wanted to hate him, I wanted to despise him for what he had done, but the love I had for him made it impossible to turn that fury outward completely, and so it turned inward, eating away at my confidence and my self-worth. I would look in the mirror and see the reflection of someone I barely recognized, someone broken, someone abandoned, someone left behind, and I would ask myself, who am I if not the woman he wanted? Who am I if not the one who could give him what he desired? Who am I if not enough? I replayed the moments of our marriage, searching for signs, clues, anything that could have prepared me for this moment, but there were none. Everything had seemed normal, everything had seemed fine, and yet beneath the surface there had been a decision brewing, a silent judgment that I was too blind to see until it hit me like a thunderbolt. I remember sitting on the edge of our bed, clutching the sheets, trying to hold myself together, trying to breathe through the panic that threatened to consume me, trying to convince myself that this was not the end of my world, even though it felt like it was. I felt abandoned in a way I had never known before. I felt invisible, as if my existence no longer mattered to the person I had loved with my whole heart. I felt the sting of humiliation, the sharp bite of inadequacy, as if being childless made me less than human, as if it erased all the love I had given, all the sacrifices I had made, all the loyalty I had shown. The days that followed were a blur of tears, sleepless nights, and endless questions. I walked through the world as a ghost of myself. I smiled for others, I laughed for others, I went through the motions of life, but inside I was crumbling. I felt hollow, empty, as if a part of me had been ripped away with him. I wondered how I would survive, how I could continue to wake up each day in a world that seemed to have betrayed me in a way I had never imagined. I questioned everything about my life, my choices, my body, my destiny. I questioned if I would ever love again, if I would ever trust again, if I would ever feel whole again. I felt the weight of rejection pressing down on me constantly, a heavy blanket of sorrow and disbelief that I could not shake no matter how hard I tried. I began to understand the deep and quiet pain of being abandoned for something I could not change, the loneliness of being left behind when someone who promised forever decides that forever is no longer theirs. I began to realize that heartbreak is not just a feeling, it is a living thing that consumes you from the inside out. It is a storm that rips through your life, leaving destruction in its wake. It is a teacher that forces you to face parts of yourself you never wanted to see. It is a fire that either burns you to ashes or forges you into something stronger, and I could feel that fire raging inside me. I could feel the heartbreak shaping me, teaching me, pushing me to the edge where I either fell apart completely or rose up stronger than I had ever been. I began to notice the small moments that reminded me I was still alive, the sunlight streaming through the window, the laughter of strangers on the street, the quiet hum of life moving forward. I clung to those moments like lifelines, trying to remind myself that there was more to me than his rejection, that my worth was not determined by his love or the lack of it. I began to whisper to myself that I would survive, that I would rise, that I would not let his decision define me. I began to see that the heartbreak was not the end but the beginning of a journey toward understanding my strength, my resilience, my ability to love and thrive even in the face of abandonment. I realized that this pain that had seemed unbearable was shaping me into a woman who would never allow anyone to determine her value again, a woman who would find joy and fulfillment on her own terms, a woman who would rise from the ashes of rejection and claim her life fully, fiercely and unapologetically. I remember the exact moment I made that decision. I looked in the mirror, tears still streaking my face, and I said to myself, I am not broken, I am not less, I am not defined by his choices, I am more than the sum of his rejection. And in that moment I felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark of determination that told me I could survive this, I would survive this, and not just survive, I would thrive, I would rebuild my life, I would find strength in the very place he had left me weak. And in that flicker of hope I found the first glimpse of the woman I was meant to become, the woman who would not be defined by heartbreak but would rise above it. And I knew deep in my soul that this was only the beginning, and that one day the pain I felt now would be replaced by triumph, joy, and a life more beautiful than I had ever imagined. I would carry that heartbreak with me, not as a chain but as a reminder of my strength, of my courage, and of the life that was waiting for me beyond the door he had slammed behind him. The days after he left were heavy, like the air itself had turned against me. I wandered through my home, touching objects that had once felt like memories. Now they felt like evidence of a life that was over. I tried to go about my routine, but every action felt hollow, every step felt weighted with the shadow of his absence. I would wake in the mornings to the quiet of a house that no longer held his presence, and I felt an ache in my chest that no medicine could soothe. I would sit at the kitchen table staring at my coffee cup, watching the steam curl up like the smoke of a fire that had burned out. I felt disconnected from myself, as if the woman I had been no longer existed, replaced by someone fragile and lost. I began to notice how every sound, every noise reminded me of what I had lost, the creak of the floorboard where he once walked, the laughter of neighbors passing by, the soft hum of the refrigerator. These small things became a chorus of reminders that he was gone and that life had shifted in ways I could not control. I began to realize that moving forward would not be easy. It was as if the ground beneath me had been pulled away and I was left to find my own footing in a world that felt unfamiliar and unkind. I cried often. I would collapse on the couch or the floor and let the tears pour without restraint. I would scream into pillows at night, trying to vent the anger and frustration that bubbled inside me. I asked myself over and over how someone could leave someone they claimed to love, how someone could walk away from promises and vows as if they had no meaning, and I could find no answer. I felt betrayed by the person I had trusted, the one I had believed would stand by me through anything. I felt betrayed by life itself for allowing this to happen, for putting me in a situation I did not ask for and could not change. I tried to talk to friends, but even their words felt hollow. I would nod and smile as they offered comfort, but inside I felt disconnected from their understanding because no one could feel the precise pain that coursed through me. I began to feel a sense of isolation, like I was in a glass box. Everyone could see me struggling, but no one could reach me. I longed for companionship, for someone to simply sit with me in the silence and hold the space for my grief, but that too was scarce, and I felt the sting of loneliness as sharp as the initial betrayal itself. I struggled with self-doubt. I would look in the mirror and see a woman who had been rejected, and I would ask myself, what was wrong with me? What had I done to deserve this? Why had I failed to give him what he wanted? Why was I not enough? I questioned my body, my spirit, my worth. I questioned if I would ever feel whole again, if I would ever find someone who could see me beyond what I lacked. I began to feel resentment, not just toward him but toward life itself, toward the cruel twist of fate that had brought me here. I wanted to scream at the universe for being unfair. I wanted to lash out at everything that had left me so vulnerable, so exposed, so broken, and yet amid the anger there was also a small spark, a tiny glimmer of defiance that refused to let me stay down, that whispered that I could still rise, that I could still find a way to reclaim my life. I started to notice the little things that reminded me I was alive, the way sunlight streamed through the windows in the morning, the way birds sang outside the kitchen window, the soft laughter of a child passing by on the street. These small moments became anchors that reminded me there was still beauty in the world, that life had not completely abandoned me. I began to take small steps forward. I would go for walks even when I felt like I could barely breathe. I would reach out to a friend even when it felt exhausting. I would start to cook meals for myself even when I had no appetite. I began to find solace in routine and in small acts of self-care. In the act of moving through the motions, I discovered that I was stronger than I had realized, that even in the depths of despair I could take one step at a time. I started to explore parts of myself that I had neglected. I read books I had always wanted to read. I took long walks in nature. I rediscovered hobbies I had set aside. I began to write down my thoughts, pouring out the raw emotions that had no place in polite conversation. I cried into pages and laughed quietly at memories that still brought me joy. I started to notice a change in the way I perceived myself. I was beginning to see myself not as a victim but as a survivor. I was beginning to see that my value was not dependent on anyone else, that I could exist fully and completely even without his presence. I realized that healing was not a straight path, it was a winding road filled with setbacks and triumphs, moments of despair followed by moments of clarity. But slowly over time the fog began to lift and I began to breathe more freely. I began to smile more often, not because I had forgotten the pain but because I was learning to live alongside it. I started to envision a future for myself that was not tied to him, that was full of possibilities that I had once thought were gone. I began to feel a sense of empowerment creeping in, a quiet confidence that told me I could survive this, and more than survive, I could thrive. I started to take care of myself in ways I had neglected before. I ate well, I exercised, I nurtured my mind and spirit. I surrounded myself with people who uplifted me and removed those who drained me. I began to feel a sense of purpose that had been buried under grief. I realized that I had a choice. I could let this heartbreak define me, or I could let it shape me into someone stronger, someone more resilient, someone who knew her worth and refused to let anyone diminish it. I started to dream again. I imagined a life filled with love, not dependent on someone else's acceptance, a life filled with joy, a life where I could stand on my own feet and claim my happiness. I began to feel the power of my own agency, the realization that I was in control of my life, that I could chart my own path, that I could find fulfillment in ways that had nothing to do with anyone who had left me behind. I began to embrace the solitude I once feared. I learned to find comfort in my own company, to enjoy the quiet moments, to listen to my thoughts and desires. I began to understand that being alone did not mean being lonely, it meant being free to rediscover who I was without the constraints of another's expectations. I found strength in the routines that once felt mundane. I discovered joy in small victories, in making it through a day when all I wanted was to collapse in tears. I learned to celebrate the resilience that had carried me through the darkest nights. I realized that the struggle to move forward was itself a testament to my strength, a sign that even in the face of abandonment I could survive and thrive. I began to see that life was offering me a second chance, a chance to build something new, to reclaim my story and rewrite the narrative that had once seemed so bleak. I started to feel a quiet hope blooming inside me, a hope that whispered that I would not just survive this heartbreak, I would rise above it and create a life that was more beautiful than I had ever imagined. And with each day I took a step further away from the pain and a step closer to the woman I was becoming, the woman who would not be defined by rejection but by resilience, courage, and the unwavering belief in her own worth. I realized that moving forward was not about forgetting him or erasing the past, it was about reclaiming myself, finding my voice and my joy, and learning to live fully, fiercely, and unapologetically, even in a world that had once seemed so cruel. And with every step I took I felt the storm inside me begin to calm, replaced by a quiet strength, a determination to thrive, and the knowledge that no matter what life threw at me I could endure, I could rebuild, I could rise. And then life shifted in a way I never could have predicted. It came quietly at first, a subtle change that I almost missed, a feeling, a movement, a small miracle that began to stir in the depths of my being. I had spent so long in the shadow of heartbreak, so long in the valley of despair, that I had almost forgotten how to hope. I had almost forgotten how to believe that life could still surprise me. And then it did. I felt it one morning, a flutter, a rhythm, a tiny heartbeat that was mine and not mine at the same time. It was a miracle that filled me with disbelief, awe, and a joy so deep it brought tears to my eyes. I had dreamed of this moment for years, yet it felt unreal. It felt like the universe had reached down and whispered to me that my story was far from over, that my life was about to be rewritten in ways I could not yet comprehend. I had carried the weight of rejection, the heavy burden of loss, and now I felt the lightness of possibility. I began to see the beauty in the waiting, the patience in the struggle, the purpose in every tear I had shed. I discovered that life has a mysterious way of giving us exactly what we need, even when we cannot see it, even when we cannot understand it. I learned that miracles often arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary days, and that sometimes the answer to our deepest longing comes when we least expect it. I could feel the miracle growing inside me each day, stronger, more tangible, and my heart swelled with a mixture of fear and wonder. I had been abandoned, I had been hurt, I had been left to navigate the world alone, and yet here I was receiving the greatest gift I could have imagined, a gift that defied the pain of the past and promised a future filled with hope. I began to prepare myself for what was coming. I read books, I researched everything I could find, I spoke to doctors, I talked to friends, I reflected on what it would mean to bring life into the world alone. I began to imagine holding tiny fingers in my hands, feeling soft warm skin against mine, hearing laughter that came from me and yet was entirely new. I dreamed of late nights rocking babies to sleep, of first steps, first words, of the small but profound joys that come from nurturing life. I began to imagine the love I could give that would never be diminished by absence, betrayal, or rejection. I thought of him and what he had taken from me, and I realized that life was giving back something far greater, something he could never take away, something that would belong to me completely and irrevocably. I felt a quiet pride in my body, in its ability to create life, in its resilience, in its capacity to heal after pain. I marveled at how it had endured heartbreak yet still carried within it the spark of life, the promise of joy. I began to envision my future with these tiny beings in my arms, and my soul soared with anticipation. I began to feel a shift within myself, a transformation from the woman who had been broken and abandoned to the woman who was becoming whole through the miracle of life. I started to see that this was more than just a blessing, it was a statement, a declaration from the universe that my worth was never tied to someone else's love, that my value could not be measured by his acceptance or rejection, that I was deserving of joy and capable of creating it for myself. I began to feel a strength I had never known before, a courage that bubbled up from deep within me and told me I could do this. I could face motherhood alone, and not just face it but thrive in it. I could love these children fully and fiercely, and they would know nothing but the power of a mother's unwavering devotion. I began to dream in vivid colors, imagining myself walking through parks with them, laughing, playing, chasing them in fields, imagining birthdays, holidays, bedtime stories, each moment filling me with a sense of purpose I had never known before. I realized that in the midst of my darkest pain I had unknowingly been preparing for this very moment. I had built resilience, strength, patience, hope, all the qualities I would now pour into nurturing life. I felt gratitude not just for the miracle itself but for the journey that had led me here, for the heartbreak, the loneliness, the struggle, because each step had shaped me into a woman who could fully appreciate this gift, who could fully embrace the power of love untainted by expectation or betrayal. I began to share the news with those closest to me, with friends who had supported me through the long nights and endless tears. Their joy mirrored mine, and in their reactions I felt a sense of validation, a sense of community that reminded me that life could be filled with love even when one relationship had failed. I began to prepare, not just emotionally but practically, organizing my home, envisioning rooms for the children, preparing spaces filled with warmth, safety, love. I bought tiny clothes, soft blankets, toys that would stimulate their curiosity and wonder. I imagined the laughter that would fill the rooms and the soft cries in the night, and I welcomed all of it, knowing that each sound would be a testament to life triumphing over despair. I began to feel anticipation mingled with fear. What if I failed? What if I could not handle it? What if the past hurt resurfaced in ways I could not control? And then I would remind myself of my own strength, of the courage that had carried me this far, of the resilience that had allowed me to endure betrayal, abandonment, heartbreak, and come out stronger on the other side. I learned to trust myself, to trust my body, to trust the journey I was on, to embrace the unknown with a mixture of excitement and humility. I started to speak to the children even before I met them, to the tiny hearts that beat inside me, to the lives that were already shaping mine. I whispered promises of love, protection, safety, joy. I spoke to them about resilience, about strength, about the power of a mother's love, and I felt their presence responding in ways that were subtle but profound, a tiny kick, a flutter, a heartbeat that matched my own. I began to understand that life does not always follow the path we imagine, and that sometimes the greatest joy comes wrapped in the most unexpected circumstances. I began to reflect on him, the man who had left me, the one who thought I would be incomplete forever without a child. I began to see that his absence had opened a space for this miracle to enter fully, without constraint, without compromise. I realized that life had been preparing me for this moment, and that his as rejection had been only a small part of a much larger plan, I began to feel a quiet confidence blooming inside me, a knowledge that I could navigate this new chapter with grace, strength, love and joy. I began to look forward to the day I would hold them in my arms, to the first time I would see their faces, to the first time I would hear their voices, to the first time I would experience the pure unfiltered joy that only children can bring. I began to feel anticipation mingled with gratitude, a deep abiding sense that even after all the pain, life had its way of surprising us with gifts we never imagined. And as my body grew round with life, I felt my spirit expand with hope, with love, with a sense of purpose that transcended anything I had known before. I began to feel a connection not just to these children but to the universe, to life, to the miraculous ability we all have to endure, to survive, to create, to love. I began to see that the struggle, the heartbreak, the loneliness, the nights spent in tears were not wasted. They were necessary. They had forged in me a strength, a courage, a depth of love that would make me a mother capable of extraordinary things. I began to embrace the changes in myself, the changes in my body, the changes in my spirit. I began to see myself not as a woman who had been abandoned but as a woman chosen by life to receive this miracle, and I marveled at the beauty of it all, the wonder of creation, the mystery of life, the unexplainable way that pain can turn into joy, sorrow into hope. And I prepared myself for the arrival of my children with anticipation, excitement and the quiet knowledge that nothing in the world could ever diminish the love that was growing inside me for them and for myself. The day I returned was not the day anyone expected it to be. It was not the day of confrontation or revenge. It was the day of quiet triumph, a day wrapped in ordinary moments that held extraordinary meaning. I had spent years building myself back up, learning to trust again, learning to love myself again, learning to navigate a world that had once seemed so cruel, and yet in all that rebuilding I had discovered a power I never knew I possessed, a confidence that radiated from me with every step I took. And as I walked through the streets of the town I had once shared with him, I felt that power humming beneath my skin, a quiet insistence that life had not finished with me, that the story was far from over. I carried with me the greatest blessing life could give me, not a grudge, not anger, not bitterness, but a pair of tiny lives that were living proof that I had endured and that I had triumphed. I had grown in ways that no one could have imagined, and now I was ready to show the world the woman I had become. I could feel the stares before I even reached the house, people I had known all my life whispering, wondering, commenting, and I felt a thrill of anticipation mingled with a quiet nervousness. I knew they expected me to be diminished, to be broken, to be consumed by the heartbreak that had once defined me, but what they found instead was a woman who walked tall, her shoulders straight, her head held high, her eyes bright with purpose and love. And when they saw the twins in my arms, their mouths fell open in astonishment. The children were small perfect miracles of life, and every person who looked at us could see the joy radiating from us. I could feel their eyes on me, measuring, judging, expecting something, and instead they found a scene that defied expectation, a mother thriving, a life blossoming in ways they could not have imagined. I walked into the house that had once been ours together with steps that were measured and deliberate. I did not rush, I did not hesitate, I did not look back. I simply moved forward, carrying the tiny lives that were my testament to resilience, to hope, to the power of surviving and thriving. I could feel the memories in the walls, the echoes of laughter, the shadows of past conversations, but they were no longer chains to bind me. They were witnesses to the transformation I had undergone. I could feel the weight of the past pressing against me, and I let it wash over me like a tide. I did not resist, I did not flinch. I allowed it to remind me of where I had been, and then I let it go like water slipping through my fingers. I entered the room, and there he was, the man who had left me, the man who had walked away, thinking I would be incomplete forever, thinking I would wither without him, thinking that absence would define me. And I could see the shock in his eyes before he even recognized the children he had believed he had escaped, a life he had abandoned, and now faced the reality of what he had missed, the woman he had underestimated, the life he had turned away from, and the children who were living proof of what he had rejected. I could see the hesitation in his stance, the disbelief in his gaze, the confusion on his face, and I felt a quiet satisfaction not born of revenge but of the undeniable truth that life had delivered in a way he could not have imagined. I spoke softly to the twins, coaxing them to smile, to respond to the world, and in their innocence I saw the power of life asserting itself, the resilience of love persisting against all odds. I could see him taking a step back, as if the room itself had shifted the balance of power subtly but undeniably. I had returned not as a woman diminished by heartbreak but as a woman flourishing with life, radiating confidence, strength and an unshakable sense of purpose. I moved through the house, letting the twins explore their surroundings, letting their laughter fill the rooms that had once been silent with absence. I watched as he struggled to comprehend the scene before him, the joy, the vitality, the undeniable presence presence of what he had lost, and I felt a quiet strength knowing that this was not about proving him wrong. It was about living fully, freely and unapologetically, about embodying a truth he had failed to recognize before, that my life was mine to shape and that love and joy could not be stolen by abandonment. I began to interact with those around us, neighbors, friends, acquaintances, people who had once whispered about me behind closed doors, and I could see the shift in their perception. I was no longer the woman they pitied, the woman who had been left behind. I was a mother thriving, a woman empowered, a life radiant with purpose, and every look of surprise, every whispered comment, every double take was a reminder of the transformation I had undergone and the power of simply living fully. I could see him trying to speak, trying to find words to bridge the gap between the past and the present, but I did not need to hear them, for the truth was written in every expression, every glance, every small gesture. I had returned not to justify myself, not to seek apology, but to show that life could not be constrained by someone else's decisions, that happiness could not be dictated by absence, that love could flourish even in the wake of betrayal. I watched as the twins interacted with the world, their curiosity untainted by past pain, their laughter filling the rooms like sunlight streaming through windows, and I realized that this was the ultimate victory, not revenge, not anger, not bitterness, but the simple undeniable fact of thriving, the simple undeniable fact of life prevailing in ways that no one could deny or control. I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a knowledge that everything I had endured, every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt had led me here, had led me to this moment where I could stand fully in my power, fully in my joy, fully in my love. And the presence of the twins was a constant reminder that miracles come in their own time, that life has a mysterious way of delivering blessings when we least expect them. And I understood that his shock, his disbelief, his hesitation were not the most important things. The most important thing was the life I held in my arms, the love I could give, the joy I could experience, and the strength I had cultivated to stand here fully alive, fully present, fully myself. I moved through the day letting life unfold, letting each moment sink into me, letting each smile, each laugh, each small milestone anchor me in the reality that I had survived, that I had grown, that I had returned stronger than anyone had anticipated, including myself. And I realized that returning was never about confrontation. It was about claiming my space in the world, about showing up as the woman I had become, about letting life speak for itself through the love and vitality of my children and the unshakable presence of my own being. I watched him watch us, and I felt no need for words, no need for confrontation, no need for validation, for life had spoken louder than any argument, any apology, any explanation ever could. And in that moment I knew that returning with the twins had achieved something far greater than I could have planned. It had demonstrated the power of resilience, the beauty of miracles, the unassailable strength of love and joy, and I understood that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter defined not by loss or abandonment but by thriving, by purpose, by the undeniable truth that life had a way of surprising us when we least expect it. And as I held the twins close and watched the expressions of those around us, I felt a sense of fulfillment deep in my soul, a knowledge that I had arrived at a place of triumph, not through force but through living fully and boldly, and the realization settled in me that the greatest victories are often the quiet ones, the ones that cannot be shouted or claimed, the ones that are felt in the heart, the ones that are written not in words but in the unstoppable momentum of life itself. And then came the moment that no one saw coming, the moment when the truth revealed itself in a way so powerful, so undeniable, that it silenced the room and reshaped everything I had thought I knew about the world, about him and about myself. I had returned with the twins, carrying in my arms the living proof of my resilience, the embodiment of hope and joy. And as I walked into the house, the weight of their presence began to change the energy of the room. The air itself seemed to shift around us. I could see him trying to process what he was seeing, trying to reconcile the man he had walked away from with the woman who now stood before him, radiant, strong, confident, alive. I could see the disbelief etched into every line of his face, the hesitation in his posture, the confusion in his gaze. He had thought he could escape life's consequences. He had thought he could leave me behind, thinking that absence would erase connection, thinking that betrayal would not bring repercussions, thinking that the world would bend to his choices. And yet here we were, I and the twins, and in that moment the balance had shifted irrevocably. He looked at me and then at them and then back at me, and I could see the realization dawning slowly, painfully on him, that these were his children, that the tiny hands that grasped my fingers, the soft warm breaths against my chest, the little feet kicking gently in my arms were the ones he had helped create, the ones he had abandoned, the ones he had walked away from. And I could see the shock like a physical weight pressing against his chest. I watched as he struggled to find words to explain the inexplicable, as if language itself had failed him, as if no combination of sounds could convey the enormity of what he was seeing, and I stood there quietly holding the twins, my heart swelling with love and pride and a quiet sense of justice that was not about revenge but about the undeniable truth of life asserting itself. I could feel the twins responding to the world around them, sensing the tension, the anticipation, the unspoken drama unfolding, and I could see their innocent faces reacting with curiosity, with trust, with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the storm of emotions in the adults around them. I could see him taking small steps forward, unsure of how to navigate this new reality, unsure of how to interact with the children who were his flesh and blood and yet had no memory of his presence, unsure of how to face the woman who had survived abandonment and returned stronger than he could have imagined. And in that moment I realized that life had delivered a lesson more powerful than any argument, more potent than any confrontation, more lasting than any grudge I could ever hold. The lesson of consequence, the lesson that every choice has its ripple, every action has its effect, and that leaving me behind had not erased life, had only created a reality that could not be ignored. I felt a quiet surge of empowerment coursing through me, a recognition that the strength I had cultivated, the resilience I had nurtured, the love I had carried through years of solitude had culminated in this moment, this undeniable affirmation that life had not forgotten me, that joy had found its way into my arms, that love had multiplied, and that I had become the vessel for a truth that could not be denied. I could see him swallowing hard, his eyes glistening with emotions he did not yet have the language to name: regret, shock, disbelief, awe, perhaps a mixture of all of them, and I could feel the power of that unspoken reckoning settling over the room like a tide that could not be stopped. I began to interact with the twins, speaking softly, coaxing them to respond to the world, letting their tiny gestures reveal the reality of the situation, letting life itself demonstrate the power of what had occurred. And I watched as he tried to connect, as if realizing for the first time that absence does not erase responsibility, that abandoning someone does not remove consequence, that the choices he had made were now meeting him face to face in a form so small, so innocent, and yet so profoundly impactful that they could not be ignored. I could see the subtle shifts in his demeanor, the way his shoulders tensed, the way his jaw tightened, the way his gaze kept flicking between me and the children as if searching for a memory that did not exist. I realized then that this was not about anger or revenge, this was about the truth asserting itself, the undeniable evidence of life creating its own narrative beyond anyone's control, beyond anyone's expectations, beyond anyone's imagination. I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction settle over me, not born of malice, not born of vindictiveness, but of recognition of the power of life to restore balance, to create joy, to assert itself in ways we cannot predict. And in that moment I understood that the shock he felt was not just about the children, it was about me, it was about the woman who had endured abandonment, who had grieved, who had struggled, who had healed, and who had returned fully alive, carrying the most tangible proof that life had not only continued but flourished in ways he could not anticipate. I could see him taking hesitant steps toward the children, his movements careful, tentative, unsure of what was expected of him, and I watched quietly, letting the moment unfold, letting him confront the reality of his choices without interference, without manipulation, without need for dramatics, letting the truth of life speak for itself through our presence, through the vitality of the twins, through the strength I radiated, through the undeniable love that filled the room. I could feel a sense of closure settling over me, a sense that this moment was not only about revelation but about reconciliation with my own journey, about recognition of how far I had come, how much I had endured, how much I had grown. And I could see the subtle acknowledgement in his eyes, the unspoken realization that what he had left behind was not broken, not diminished, not defeated, but thriving, loving, resilient, and beautiful in ways he had failed to foresee. I began to feel the magnitude of the lesson unfolding around us, the lesson that life has a way of balancing the scales, that the consequences of our actions have a way of arriving at the right time, that miracles have a way of manifesting in the smallest and most unexpected ways, that love persists beyond abandonment, and that resilience has a way of asserting itself so powerfully that it cannot be ignored. I began to interact more with the twins, letting them explore the room, letting their laughter and curiosity fill every corner, letting their existence demonstrate the undeniable truth of our lives. I could see him trying to engage, trying to reconcile the past with the present, trying to understand how he had missed the beauty that now stood before him, and I felt a quiet pride in knowing that this moment was not engineered, it was lived, it was real, it was organic, it was life asserting itself in a way that no one could contest. I could feel a deep sense of gratitude filling me, gratitude for the years of struggle, for the heartbreak, for the loneliness, for the nights spent crying, for the pain that had once seemed unbearable, because each of those experiences had forged in me a strength, a courage, a depth of love that had allowed me to arrive at this moment fully prepared to embrace the miracle, fully prepared to live fully, and fully prepared to let life itself speak louder than any words, any arguments, any judgments could ever do. I realized then that this revelation, the shock, the disbelief, the awe that filled the room was not a punishment for him, it was a statement from life. It was the affirmation that abandonment does not define us, that betrayal does not diminish us, that resilience and love and joy have a way of asserting themselves in ways that cannot be denied. And I held the twins closer, feeling their tiny hearts beat against mine, and I knew with certainty that the lesson had been delivered, the truth had been revealed, the power of life had spoken, and in that truth I found not only empowerment but also peace, not only triumph but also joy, not only resolution but also the quiet understanding that life has a way of restoring balance in the most unexpected and beautiful ways. After everything that had happened, after the heartbreak, after the struggle, after the miracle and the shocking revelation, I began to see life in a way I had never seen it before. I began to understand that the pain, the abandonment, the tears, the sleepless nights were not the end of my story, but the preparation for something greater, something more powerful, something that would shape me into the woman I was always meant to become. I realized that true empowerment does not come from revenge, does not come from anger, does not come from proving someone wrong. It comes from rising despite everything. It comes from embracing your own worth, from understanding your own value, from knowing that no one else's choices can define who you are. And I began to feel that empowerment growing inside me, a quiet, unshakable confidence that radiated in every glance, every movement, every breath I took. I could feel it in my interactions with the twins, in the way I held them, the way I nurtured them, the way I loved them without hesitation, without fear, without compromise. And I began to see that this was the ultimate lesson, the ultimate triumph, the ultimate assertion of who I had become, because life had taught me that no matter what happens, no matter who leaves, no matter who betrays you, no matter how deep the pain, you can always rise, you can always rebuild, you can always thrive. I began to notice the small victories, the little moments that proved to me every day that I was powerful and capable. I watched the twins laugh at something simple and felt a wave of joy so profound it made my chest ache. I felt the warmth of their tiny hands in mine and realized that love is the strongest force in the universe, that nurturing life is the most sacred act a woman can perform, and that nothing anyone else thinks or does can diminish that power. I started to reflect on the journey that had brought me here, and I saw it with new eyes. I saw the heartbreak not as a curse but as a teacher. I saw the struggle not as a punishment but as preparation. I saw the years of loneliness not as emptiness but as a forge that had strengthened my spirit. I realized that every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt had been necessary for me to arrive at this place fully alive, fully aware, fully myself. I began to understand that empowerment is not just about standing tall in the world, it is about claiming your own story. It is about owning your past, your present, and your future, and refusing to let anyone else dictate the narrative. I began to feel a sense of peace settling over me, a quiet understanding that life had a way of balancing itself, that what is meant for us will come to us in its own time, and that the choices of others are not a reflection of our value but a reflection of their own limitations. I watched the twins grow in their curiosity, in their joy, in their love, and I saw in them a reflection of my own strength, a living testament to the resilience I had cultivated, a reminder that I could nurture life and love and joy even when the world had seemed so unkind. I began to notice how my perspective had shifted, how my heart had opened, how my soul had expanded. I saw that the greatest revenge is not anger but thriving, that the most profound triumph is not proving someone wrong but proving yourself right, that the ultimate lesson is to live fully, fiercely, and unapologetically regardless of what anyone else thinks. I began to embrace the quiet moments of life, the early mornings when the sun streamed through the windows and the house was still, the soft laughter of the twins playing with toys, the gentle hum of daily routines that had once seemed mundane now filled with meaning. I felt gratitude for everything the past had taught me, for the strength it had given me, for the courage it had nurtured, for the depth of love I had discovered within myself. And I began to see that this was the ultimate empowerment, the ability to love fully, to live fully, to embrace life in all its complexity and all its joy and all its unexpected twists and turns. I reflected on the woman I had been, the one who had been abandoned, the one who had been left behind, the one who had doubted her worth, and I marveled at the transformation I had undergone, at the resilience I had found, at the power that had grown quietly within me. Through every trial, through every tear, through every moment of uncertainty, I began to understand that empowerment is not a destination, it is a journey, it is a way of being, it is a commitment to yourself, to your values, to your joy, to your life. And I could feel that commitment solidifying within me like a flame that could not be extinguished, a fire that would guide me through every challenge, every setback, every moment of doubt. I began to see that the lessons I had learned were universal, that every woman, every person who has been abandoned abandoned, rejected, hurt or betrayed could find the same strength within themselves if they choose to rise, if they choose to embrace their worth, if they choose to nurture their own joy. I began to feel a sense of responsibility, not in a heavy way but in a profound way, a recognition that my story could inspire others, that my journey could serve as a beacon, that empowerment is possible even in the darkest moments, even when life seems unfair, even when heartbreak feels unbearable. I watched the twins and saw in them a symbol of hope, a symbol of life, a reminder that we have the capacity to create joy, to nurture love, to build a future beyond what we imagined. I began to realize that the ultimate lesson of my journey was not about him, not about the heartbreak, not about the rejection, but about me, about my growth, my strength, my resilience, and the life I had built with the twins, a life full of love, full of joy, full of meaning. I began to feel the fullness of my own presence, the power of my own choices, the beauty of my own journey, and I knew that I would never again allow anyone else's opinion to define me, to diminish me, to make me doubt my worth. I began to see that empowerment is not loud, it is not flashy, it is not dependent on external validation, it is quiet, steadfast, deep-rooted in self-love and self-respect, and I could feel that empowerment growing stronger each day as I moved through life, as I nurtured the twins, as I pursued my dreams, as I lived fully. I began to understand that life has a way of restoring balance, a way of rewarding resilience, a way of giving back in ways we least expect, and that my journey from heartbreak to empowerment was a living proof of that truth. I watched myself interact with the world with confidence, with grace, with a deep knowing that I was worthy, that I was powerful, that I was capable, and I realized that the ultimate revenge, the ultimate triumph, the ultimate lesson is to rise above bitterness, to rise above resentment, to rise above the pain and live a life so full of love, joy and purpose that it speaks louder than any words ever could. I began to embrace the freedom that comes from self-empowerment, the liberation that comes from trusting yourself, from honoring your own journey, from living authentically and unapologetically, and I felt a sense of fulfillment so deep it filled every corner of my being, a quiet joy that radiated from my soul and touched everything I did. I began to see that the legacy I was creating was not just for myself but for the twins, for the future, for every woman who has ever doubted her worth, and I felt pride in the life I had built, in the love I had cultivated, in the strength I had discovered, and I knew with certainty that no heartbreak, no abandonment, no betrayal could ever take this from me, that my power, my joy, my love, my life were mine and mine alone, to nurture, to protect, to celebrate, and I felt a sense of peace, a sense of triumph, a sense of empowerment that surpassed anything I had ever known, and in that peace I understood that this was the culmination of my journey, that the lesson was clear, that the power of resilience, the beauty of love, the strength of self-belief, and the joy of life are the ultimate truths, and that no one can ever take them away from you once you claim them, once you nurture them, once you embrace them fully.